Hi, good morning. So yeah, I wanted to talk to you guys about EnvJasmine, EnvJS and Jasmine, and how I mushed them together to get unit testing working on my Hudson server, which is really awesome. But first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Trevor Lalush-Menagh at TrevMex. I work for Comcast, which is a big evil company, and we do big evil things, but the stuff I do is kind of fun, and they pay me a lot of money to do it, so that's cool. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about that. It's interesting. I came from a smaller team, and I went to that was doing unit testing, doing a lot of stuff, to a larger team where we really didn't do any unit testing at all, especially not in JavaScript. And I came from a Ruby world where everyone's like, oh, I love unit testing. And I was like, yeah, I love unit testing too. So I started indoctrinating people in my team into unit testing, but really I wanted some accountability to that. So I'm going to give a little bit of the presentation I gave to them to try and impassion them on unit testing, and then I'll talk about the tools I use to mush it together. So I already asked this before, but raise your hand if you test your JavaScript programmatically. Okay, good. That's awesome. So I'm going to go through a little primer on what unit tests are. Unit tests test functions. I believe that you should test your logic over functions and not just a function for testing a function. So that function doesn't have any logic, so I wouldn't write a test for it. Now, you might say, that's dumb, but that's the way I would do it. I also believe that you should write functions that do one thing and one thing really well. So this is the Unix principle, that you have a program that does one thing and one thing really well. And I like my functions to be small like that too. You write a small function, you can test it really easy. If you write a function that has 13 different things, well then your test is going to be a beast and you're going to be crying and that sucks, right? So that's that. So here we go. Here's the test. I have, you guys, if you're familiar with Jasmine, this is Jasmine. It sort of looks like RSpec. Coming from a Ruby world, I really liked RSpec, so that's why I chose Jasmine. Actually, I chose JSpec first, but then the guy that did JSpec said, I'm not doing that anymore, use Jasmine, so mazel tov, that's where we are. And so that's pretty straightforward. I describe add1, and it returns the parameter +1. And then I expect add1 with 1 to equal 2. So that's pretty straightforward. And the entire point of this is the red-green refactor cycle. And I really got into this after going to a code camp once. I went to this code camp about 1.5 years ago, and it's really awesome. Like, we got together and we would write a crappy test that broke, we would write the test that fixed it, and then we'd fix the code because we wrote a really crappy code just to make it pass. And over and over and over again. And it's addictively fun to code this way, but it's really, really hard to get people in the enterprise, at least, or like when you have a day job and you have to get your stuff done, and you're like, I just want to get my stuff done, and I don't test. Like I'm really bad. I don't test all the time. I wish I did test all the time. I love testing, but it's hard to do that without having a group of people that also love testing. So that's why I preach on testing, because I want other people to get excited about it. And the entire concept behind red-green refactor is really my ideal working situation. I write something, I write a little thing, I make it work, I make it better. That seems like the best case scenario in my opinion. But the problem is legacy code. So like, this is really great in Greenfield stuff, and like, it's all fairies and unicorns when you're talking about this stuff. But then you get this 20,000 line JavaScript file. 20,000 line JavaScript file. Why? Why? With like tons of crappy code in there, and you're like, how can I test that? Well, it's about testing little tiny things at once. And you guys probably already know this, the ones that are testing at least, that if you have a piece of legacy code and you have a bug, write a test that proves your bug exists. And that's like a little tiny thing you can do to make your life a little tiny bit better. Even that's a hard sell for a lot of people because they have a bug and they just want to get stuff done. Maybe you have an SLA that says you need to get this bug fixed in 8 hours or you're fired. That happens. And you're thinking, test won't make it better. But you know what happens is that when I don't write a test, if I don't write a test for a thing, I send it off to QA. QA is like, you didn't fix it. And I'm like, oh no. So that kind of sucks. And writing tests really helps mediate that. So I'll go through this quickly. Like, how do I refactor stuff? So look, I have a reference to a global variable in a function. What the hell? So I see this a lot in the code that I work with, where someone has a global variable and they're referencing a global variable inside function. So that one is adding our buddy Spike to the kennel. And that's really hard to test because my test now has to have a global variable kennel and know about that and handle that. So here's how we're testing it. We're defining a global inside our test itself, and then we're adding Spike to it. So this test actually works, but it's kind of crappy, and it doesn't work very well. I mean, I'm not a big fan of doing that. So here's a cool way of refactoring it, in my opinion. I just say add dog to kennel, and I pass the kennel in. I still have the stupid global kennel, but now this function can live without an access to that global. And that's awesome. Like, I like a function that doesn't depend on anything external. And this function, with that small change to the signature, now you don't have an external dependency. Isn't that cool? So that's much, much easier to test, in my opinion. I just say expect add dog's kennel, and I'm passing in an empty array, that's my kennel, to Spike and have it equal Spike. I don't have to define another variable in my test. It's kind of cool. Okay. But sometimes you have to call external functions. This is my favorite example of window console log, right? So I have a function that does console log if console log exists, right? I call it whatever, like sim.log or something like that, so that it doesn't blow up an IE, because that sucks. So I use Spies for that. Jasmine has this concept of Spies. I'm sure that other test suites also have the concept of Spies, or mocks, or whatever you want to call it. But Spies are cool. This says I'm going to spy on window console log. That means I'm going to say, look at what window console log is doing, register when it's being called, and let me know when it's been called. And then I can say expect my cool log thing that's been namespaced. You guys should really namespace your stuff. If you're not namespacing your stuff, god damn it, right? But please do. That would be good. I want to expect my log function to equal test message, but I'm also going to expect window console log to have been called with test message. That bottom expect is what I'm spying on, because a funny thing with Jasmine, if you actually call window console log in Jasmine, it explodes. That kind of sucks. For one reason or another. And maybe your test suite doesn't have this problem, but I guarantee you'll run into these type of problems somewhere. So that's that. What about AJAX? AJAX is cool. So I have an AJAX-y-like function that does some stuff. So I have my widget that makes an AJAX call and adds some shit to the DOM when it's successful. Whoops, I cursed, sorry. And add data to DOM, it does some stuff, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make the AJAX call on top, and I'm going to add a spy to add data to DOM. What that's doing is saying, well, just make sure to see if this has been called. And Jasmine has this weird thing called most recent AJAX request, which is basically just an array of AJAX calls. So what jQuery AJAX does, which is an add-on to, not jQuery, what Jasmine-AJAX does, which is an add-on to Jasmine, is it creates this AJAX queuing that captures all of your AJAX requests, all of your XHR requests, and puts them in this array. So I can just say, get the most recent AJAX request and set a fake response to it. So then I expect my widget to have been called with foo, because that's what the response text is going to be. So hopefully that's not too complicated, but that's a way to test AJAX with Jasmine. So hopefully some of you already knew that, and that's really cool. But maybe some of you didn't. That's really, really awesome, in my opinion. So this is the interesting stuff. one of the big problems, now that you know what Jasmine is and all that stuff, that's great. One of the things that I really, really wanted to do when I introduced JavaScript unit tests to Comcast is I wanted like front-end developers to be able to break the build. So we have a continuous integration server. We're using Hudson, and that's hooked up with this huge Maven build script. And so a Maven test runs every time you make a build on the Hudson server, and if one of the middleware or backend guys wrote something crappy and a test blew up, it would break the build. But our front-end guys, myself included, were not held responsible for bugs. So they'd slip through, and then QA would get something. You know, every time you have QA involved with something, it costs a whole bunch of money and a whole bunch of time, and that really sucks. Well, wouldn't it be nice if we could catch it earlier on? So what we did is we took Envjs. Do you guys know what Envjs is? Raise your hands. That's cool. So for you guys that don't, Envjs is a headless browser written in JavaScript, and it was written by the guy that did jQuery, John Resnick, and it's awesome. It's really cool. It runs on top of Rhino, which is a JavaScript engine for Java. Now that's hot because I can take Rhino and run that in my Maven build chain. So what we did is we took Rhino, and on top of Rhino, we put EnvJS. And on top of EnvJS, we loaded Jasmine. And on top of Jasmine, we loaded all our tests. So with one Java command, I can run all of my tests inside a Java runtime. And that's really cool, because what we did then is hook that into Maven, and now when your JavaScript test fails, you get an alert and you broke the build. Now, as a front-end engineer, maybe you're saying, I don't want to break the build. Breaking the build's lame, and I don't want the responsibility. Well, you suck if you do that. It would be better if you did break the build. I think breaking the build is a really good thing, because it means that that you did something wrong, and you should be able to be aware of that. So basically, if you go to EnvJasmine under my GitHub account, you can see what's going on there. It's really straightforward. There's a bunch of directories. The bin directory is where there's some shell scripts that will just run the test, and that's kind of cool. Then you could add your dependencies, which is like if you have jQuery or other dependencies that you aren't testing but you need, you add them there. Create tests in the specs directory, run them. That's it. It's pretty straightforward. The two other things I did is I created the plugin for Maven, which is here in my EnvJasmine Maven example. That's just, honestly, all I have to do is look at the pom.xml in this. If you're familiar with Maven and you look at the pom.xml in this directory, you'll see what I'm doing here. It's pretty straightforward. Basically, it's a cut and paste into your pom.xml configuration file, and you're done. Last thing I did, because I'm a Rails geek, was that I added EnvJasmine to Rails. The cool thing about this EnvJasmine thing is that you can, it's totally portable. This is a self-contained thing that all you need is Java to run. So I can take it and put it in any project. It doesn't have to be in Maven. It doesn't have to be in Ant. It doesn't have to be in Rails. One of the things that one of the reasons we created this is because there was a Maven plugin for Jasmine, but it just didn't work so hot. It didn't work the way I wanted it to work, so we made something more portable. And the only thing you have to do to add this to Rails is add a tiny rake file in your libtasks directory, and then when you run rake test, whoop, you have your Jasmine tests running in Rails. So what's next? What's next is you should test. You should test your code. And if you're in a big enterprisey place where they have lots of other tools, you should work on hooking those tests up in a way that other people can pay attention to them. Testing is really important. It helps everyone's code quality go up. It helps you as a programmer. I don't know, ever since I started working with tests, it's made a huge difference on the way I code. I mean, it's fundamentally changed the way I write functions. The way I write my code is different because I think about the way you test it. So if you don't test your code, please test your code. If you do test your code and you can't break the build, please figure out how you can break the build because it's pretty important. And that's my talk. My name's Trevor. Nice to meet you all.